Good morning. We have a lot to discuss in Romans this morning. And so, if you will, be heading toward, let me move it forward to where we want to go. Verses 28 through 32 will be where we'll begin this morning. We'll reference back some of the things that we have already discussed. Let me get everything set up here. Sometimes on Sunday morning, my life kind of evolves, is what happens on Sunday morning, because it takes on a life of its own by the time that I get here. And so, Rebecca, it's good to see you this morning. Yeah. Everything going well? Good deal. Good deal. I just happened to notice that she's with us this morning. And yeah, she favors her mom a lot, so I had to take a second look this morning. Okay, so as we move into Romans chapter 1, before we do that, we want to see if there's any updates on that you need to share with me this morning as we begin. Anything that we need to be aware of? Any updates with anyone?
John, he has to go Tuesday to Tupelo. The doctor, they're going down in his throat to see about wrapping those veins.
Ah, okay.
Dangerous.
Does sound dangerous. What time you got to be there?
8:30.
8:30. Okay, so.
They've done wrapping, tried to wrap them cold. They said they get him buried, they're going to burst out on him. So there ain't much they can do. They're going to try to wrap something around to keep the expansion there. I knew about it for several years, just keep worse, you know.
Please keep John in your prayers as he goes through this procedure. It's on Tuesday, right? Tuesday. Okay.
Did you say Tupelo?
Tupelo. Anything else this morning? Any updates? Yes, ma'am.
My nephew, Mikey, he had a bad week. He had to have a transfusion. And that's my nephew that has cancer, 19-year-old. And he has to have a lot of tests this week. They want to do a brain scan, spinal tap.
Okay, so please keep Bruce's nephew in your prayers that will be going through test, and also it's cancer. So please keep him in your prayers. Yes.
Judy sent out a note sometime last night or this morning that Dewey is having surgery on Wednesday.
Yes. Does anyone know more about that? Because it was late, and so I didn't try to contact him late last night. Dewey is having surgery on Wednesday. On Wednesday. So if anyone knows, might know. As far as I know, he is waiting for the results of the test. That's the last thing he told me, but I tried to contact him on his birthday and did not get him. Okay?
Who was that?
Butterbean, or Sean, yes. He was going through some pretty serious situation that was going on with him. So, Cindy, is your mom better? Okay, Sue was in the hospital this week. It was COVID, so please remember her in your prayers. Sue Fowler. Also, Emmett, is he? Oh, good. Emmett's not going to have surgery. And is Anna doing okay? Her numbers are down. Okay. They had a scare this past week, and things happened so quickly. It was happening so quickly. Cindy was just, bless her heart. But Anna's numbers had gone up, and all of you know the condition that she's had through the years, and she took her off the medication a couple of years ago, but now I think they're going to put her back on the medication, maybe. Okay, but the numbers are down a little bit. So, yes, sir.
Zach recovered from his spider bite.
Ah, he did. Okay, Zach recovered from his spider bite. You know, that gets you scared pretty quick. Spider bites are tough. So, anything else? As I know more about what's going on, what we do, I'll let y'all know. But tell Zach we're thinking about him. I know that's scary.
We knew he had leg trouble. You know, she had her cancer at one time.
That's right. That's right. That was before. That was while she was expecting the baby. Yeah, sure did. Sure did.
When is homecoming? November?
Homecoming is November the 12th. November the 12th. That's going to work better. By the way, we haven't announced the 2024 calendar, but it will also not be on the 5th Sunday of March because I scheduled it for the 5th Sunday of March. Richard Hart, who was supposed to come last year and could not come, but guess what? That's Easter weekend. And I had not even thought about Easter being that early, and so we're working on reworking that date a little bit. We don't do a 5th Sunday in December because, ladies, y'all are cooking during the holidays and all that, so it was going to be a long stretch between homecoming and that 5th Sunday, but now maybe we'll narrow that gap just a little bit and have January or February 1 somewhere in there for Richard to come, so we'll see. Don't want to go as late as April because we'll have another 5th Sunday. Yes, ma'am. Richard Harp. He is from Birmingham. He was a youth minister at 4th Street in Selmer when Jeremy Weekly was the minister there. They worked together there. Okay. Any other updates or anything that we need to look at? The 24 calendar is not finished. We have one spot left on it. If you have a recommendation for a speaker for 24, please let us know. Chris Whitaker? We could have him back again. He would be more than glad to come back, I'm pretty sure. Pretty sure. All right, let's start then in the book of Romans. Romans chapter 1, verses 28 through 32. Now, as we discussed last week, we looked at the Roman culture. I want to remind you that since the time that sin entered the world, and there's human beings on the face of this earth who are created with free will. Now remember, we are created in the image of God, which means there is a stamp on us. God's image is stamped on us. Our eternal spirit, our eternal soul, who we really are. This is just a shell that we live in for a while. Even if you live 100 years or 100 plus years, as some had, this is only a shell. And it houses us for a period of time. But who we really are is our eternal spirit, our eternal soul that lives within us and will live on for eternity. That we are made in God's image and God's likeness, and we have a code written on our hearts. We're going to talk more about that when we get into chapter 2. But understand something, because we are created with free will, means that we can ignore that code, and mankind has done that. And not only has mankind ignored that code, but also there's been some horrific things that man has done over the years. Well, just when you think our discussion last week begins to describe how terrible people can be. Now, I want to point out something to you, that sin is sin. We need to be very cautious in our approach to sin, that we don't start making some sins worse than others. Paul in Romans is not trying to get us to minimize some sin and to make other sin worse. What he's describing in the verses preceding this, he's describing the fact that they have found a way to pervert something that God declared in the beginning that He made male and female. And that's the way God created us, and that's the way God intends for things to be. He reiterates that in Matthew chapter 19 when He says it again. And Jesus says, from the beginning, all this craziness that's going on was not so, because God made us male and female. Man will leave his father and mother, be joined to his wife, and they shall be one flesh. That one flesh relationship is to be enjoyed between a husband and wife. That's God's way. Now, has man perverted that? Yes, man has perverted that. And that was our discussion from last week, going back to the Roman culture, pointing out that they even had gods. Apollo was one who was the god of homosexual love. You know, you don't hear that in your mythological books that you read that all makes it all glamorous and all that kind of stuff, but that's the truth. The Roman culture openly accepted same-sex relationships. It was nothing to them. They just kind of moved back and forth between male and female and so forth. That was just part of their culture. Well, guess what, folks? It's becoming part of our culture too. What we are told is that young people today are just experimenting like a fad. Just something that's become socially a part of what people do. Had a young man tell me one day, he said, I won't call the name of the school, but he said, we guys can't find anybody to date because all of our girls are lesbians. And I said, okay. I'm pretty sure that he was exaggerating, okay? But it is bad. It is bad. It is bad wherever you go. Mississippi changed their rules concerning the prom, and they changed the rules to where that they are no longer school sponsored. Do you know why they're no longer school sponsored?
Because they want to have same-sex partners.
Well, yes, because there was an insistence that I can take my girlfriend or my boyfriend to the prom. And so Mississippi said, okay, we're not going to sponsor that. From now on, the proms have to be run more by the parents and so forth. Doesn't mean school folks aren't involved in it to a great degree, but the school itself does not say, hey, we are doing this. No, that has changed.
And the progressives, so-called, call us foolish religious fanatics for believing that.
They do call us fanatics for believing that. I try not to bring politics into, what I mean by individual names of politicians, into our discussion.
Okay.
But there was, yes.
I heard a preacher say last Sunday that one of the schools in Alcorn County got a litter box in the bathroom in case you want to identify as a kitty cat.
Well,
That's happening in Arkansas.
we laugh, but it is true that you can identify now as anything you want to identify as. Anything. From an animal to the other sex from what you are, to just general neutral is the big thing that they're pushing now. In fact, they're not only pushing that, but if you are not coming on board with the idea of gender neutral pronouns, then you're going to be in some places you might be fired or removed from a school board, or and you can carry that on to its nth degree. That's coming. Cindy, you probably need to get ready for that as a school secretary. It's coming. It's coming in Mississippi. Of course, we're a fairly conservative state, but we also never thought that the legislature of the state of Mississippi would pass a law saying that you couldn't pray at a ball game too. But we got there. Now we're ignoring it, but as far as I know, I don't know if that rule was that rule ever removed in the state of Mississippi. They talked about it, they discussed it, but I'm not sure. Like I said, we go on and we do it anyway, and we ignore it. We just don't use a school official to lead the prayer. We use someone else saying it's volunteer, but I don't think that was ever removed. Did you ever think we'd get there? Well, guess where we are now. And that's what I was fixing to say when Dwayne mentioned that a while ago of how they feel about us. Now, okay, so we move from that situation. Now watch this. We move from that situation with our schools concerning the prom. Now we're in transgender. And that's this broad a scope. You don't know when you're treading on something that is something that they don't like or don't approve of you treading on. So you don't know from one day to the next. You're just kind of in a tailspin because something new is coming up every day. Now, I said all that to say this. We think that is an abomination. And Paul says that what they were doing, men with men, women with women, is against nature. But Paul does not say that it is a worse sin than any other sin. Now let me tell you why I'm saying this, because you got to be careful. If you start calling that a worse sin than any other sin, then you begin to start minimizing other sin. Well, I've heard someone say this, but at least he's with a girl. Or at least she's with a man. And I'm going, but it's still sin. Outside of marriage, it is still sin. Just because, yeah, he's with a girl, and yeah, she's with a guy, doesn't make it right. It is still sin. Paul is not going into this discussion. Paul is merely describing the depths of sin that they had dove into. Is what he's describing. Just how far their sin has gone. And what I described a while ago is just how far the sin has gone. Not saying that it is worse than any other. Because now, what does he do? Look at verses 28 through 32. After having said all that, now, some would say he stopped preaching and started meddling. Because many of the Christians who held the Christian values would have said, yeah, you preach, Paul. But now he gets to this section, and listen to him. And just as they did not see fit to acknowledge God, God gave them up to a depraved mind, to do those things that are not proper. People having been filled with all unrighteousness, wickedness, greed. Whoa.
Trying to improve their lives.
And he puts greed beside evil. Greed. Do we become so greedy sometimes? Hopefully we're beginning to move a little bit away from that, in that we went through a period of time where people worked day and night trying to have more and more and more, and many times their families were neglected because of that, and so forth and so on. But we're not quite as bad about that as we were, but still, Still, you know, greed. We got to have this. We got to have this. I've got to have this. And evil, full of envy. Whoa. You putting envy beside evil? Well, no, he not only puts it beside evil, he puts it beside what? Murder. He puts envy beside murder. Strife. What is strife? Stirring stuff up. Do you know one of the things that is said in the Old Testament in a list of things that God hates is causing what? Division among brethren. Stirring up trouble and causing division among brethren. God hates it. And He puts that beside murder. And He puts it beside deceit. Now, this word deceit refers to all what? Lying. Deceit is all lying. It doesn't matter what form it comes in. All lying falls under the word deceit. Every kind of lying that we can talk about, small lies, white lies that we call them, all the way up to the big stories that people tell. Or it also involves, it would involve cheating. You know, I talk to our young people about cheating, and I'll ask the question sometimes, who cheats in school? And you'd be surprised. It's almost a unanimous hand that goes up. And I'm asking, okay, but do you not realize that that's being deceptive? Do you not realize that that's wrong? And, well, it's just a thing people do. Well, is it really? Yes, it is. Deceit. Malice. What would malice be?
Intending wrong to another person.
Yeah, you intend wrong to another person. You intentionally, possibly try to destroy someone's reputation, or you try to do something underhanded to get at them, to hurt them in some way. That's malice. Gossips. Whoa, now he's really getting to meddling when you start talking about gossip. You know, anyone like a good juicy bit of gossip? Yeah, gossip. Gossip is something that is rampant. And you're not going to like where I say it's rampant at. It's rampant in the church, throughout the brotherhood. And I'm going to tell you, sometimes the worst gossipers are preachers. Let me tell you what I mean by that. Oh, I heard so-and-so was saying so-and-so about... Even will pick up the pen and start writing up a brother before he's ever talked to him. Or even ask him where his stance is on something. Gossip. The Lord says, don't do it. Don't do it. But He puts it in the same category. Remember, there are no verse divisions. There are no chapter divisions in the Scripture. So therefore, this is all in the same context. Leaving the natural use of the woman, the natural use of the man, it's in the same context as this passage. Slanderers, haters of God, insolent, arrogant, boastful, inventors of evil, and hold on just a minute, disobedient to parents. Disobedient to parents. You think we're living in that age? They were living in that age then. Disobedient to parents. Which, by the way, would include not honoring your father and mother when they reach the age that you should be taking care of them. Without understanding, untrustworthy, unfeeling, and unmerciful. And although they know that the ordinance of God They know the ordinance of God, that those who practice such things are worthy of death. They not only do the same, but also approve of those who practice them. Now, under the Old Testament law, some of these sins were equal to a stoning. Okay? But he's not really here making reference to that. But he's making reference to what?
The wages of sin.
The wages of sin. He's making reference to spiritual death. Now, granted, going back to Old Testament law, you know, if you committed adultery, the adulterers would be taken out and stoned. If you were committing these acts that he described, the unnatural acts, then you would be stoned. If you committed murder, and it was with malice in your heart, and you committed that murder, and you intentionally killed someone, then it was life for life. That was the Old Testament law. But look at all these other sins that are included here. So that's not the reference here at the end, or worthy of death, but instead it is spiritual death. He's making reference to spiritual things. Those who commit these things are worthy of death. And they know this, he said. How do they know this?
God put it in.
Yeah, God put it inside us. Again, how do we determine what's right or wrong? You know, okay, we're a nation. We go to set our laws. How do we determine that murder is wrong? How do we determine that defrauding someone is wrong? How do we determine that stealing in the form of whatever form it may come, like espionage and so forth? How do we determine that's wrong? You know, I'm using things outside of the normal use of just everyday things we think of. How do we know that's wrong? How do we know in World War II, as I pointed out last week, how do we know that what Hitler did against the Jews and 3 million Jews being killed, how do we know that was wrong? Well, there is a standard that God has set. And that standard is that we know and we understand that these things are worthy of the punishment of God.
Harry?
Yes.
There's a scripture somewhere, can't remember where, but it says that God set eternity in the hearts of men.
Yes. Yes.
It may be Ezekiel, I don't know.
And he did.
Does that apply?
It applies. God set eternity in the hearts of men. God set a standard in us. We have a standard.
Ecclesiastes 3:11.
Ecclesiastes 3:11. Okay? You want to read that for us if you're there?
I'll have to find it.
Ecclesiastes 3:11. And while he's looking for that, look at this for just a moment. They not only do the same. Now keep in mind that many of them have committed these sinful acts that he's talking about. But they also approve of those who practice them. Now, what does he mean by that statement? They also approve of those who practice them.
Like what's going on today? You can get in trouble if you don't approve some of the things that's going on.
A modern day application fits well here, and you're right. A modern day application fits well. There are many who stand personally, in their personal beliefs, they stand against, but because of social pressure, will give approval to. One of the big discussions going on in our society is a discussion over abortion. How many times have you heard people stand in the political arena, stand on both sides of the aisle and everything in the middle, who have stood and said, I personally do not believe that you should get an abortion, but I believe they have a right to do it. How many times have you heard that?
Yeah.
Well, if you hadn't, you need to listen. That's talking out of both sides of your mouth, by the way. And but if you hadn't heard it, you need to listen, because it's said just about every day. So not only, they may not be doing it themselves. He said, now some of them are doing it themselves. But he said they may not be doing it themselves, but they give approval to those who are. Now, how serious is this matter? It leads to death. It also means that if you take that stance as a Christian, that you're going to fail to teach people the true gospel of Jesus Christ. It means you're going to fail to do that.
If you're not against something entirely, then you're for it. I mean, a person can't stand up and say, well, I'm against it, but I think
Yeah.
they have a right to do it. Well,
That's
that's a lie.
yeah,
That person is lying.
yeah.
You're either
And-
one way or the other.
Yeah, you got to be firm where you stand. You got to be firm where you stand. Now, because I work with young people for so long, you'll hear me make a lot of references, because that's our future. It's the future of our nation. It's the future of the church. But I want you to understand, they're confused. They're very, very confused. Because what they have been taught for the past 20 years, not in the church, not in the church. This is not an indictment of the church, because the church hasn't taught this. But understand something, we only have them here. We only have them like 4 hours a week. And then if we have activities and we go to camps and stuff like that, you add that in, but it still doesn't add up to the number of hours that they're out there in the world. And they're being taught this. And for the past 20 years, they have been taught accept, 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 accept. Now, here's where our young people are. You sit down and talk with them for a while and you figure out how confused they are. Because they are taught to live and let live. Do you know what that means? Live and let live. And what that means is, okay, well, so somebody is gay. Well, you know, that's what they've chosen to do. If you're not careful, you get to the point in time where you're not going to share the message of Christ with them, because they've just gone, they've got their own way. You hear what I'm saying? They've got their own way. That's what they want to do. That's the way they've chosen. That's the way they want to think. That's what they want to do.
Well, Terry, you can't be a Christian and be for that kind of stuff.
No, you can't.
If you're
But-
fooling yourself, if you are.
But here's the question. What about indifference? Because that's what it's created. It's created indifference. It has, you'll have Christian young people say, I would not do that. But their indifference to it is the problem. And when indifference comes, indifference will keep you from sharing the message of Christ and the true gospel.
There's been many a daddy and mama that ends up making a decision, and it's the wrong decision.
There has. There's been a lot of that, yes. And so Paul is saying, you live in this society. You live in this world. Going back to our study of Revelation, remember what we said in Revelation? That many of them, they didn't necessarily embrace or say, okay, I will accept the idols or the emperor worship, but they sure did like to go and socialize in that situation and be accepted. So if you wanted to put it that way, that's what Paul's saying. Paul is saying you can't approve by your lack of disapproval. Do you hear? You can't approve by your lack of disapproval. Was that the bell? Okay.
Lawrence has that scripture.
Okay, please read it for us.
He has made everything appropriate in its time. He has also set eternity in their heart, yet so that man will not find out the work which God has done from the beginning even to the end. Not sure I understand that last phrase.
But God has set in us eternity. God has set in us a standard of living, a standard of life for all mankind. It doesn't matter where you are. If you're in Japan, if you're in China, wherever you are, there is a standard. They have to have somewhere to draw from to make law. Now they may try to reject God, but then turn around and lay out the very principles that God laid out. Why? Because God put a stamp on us of a moral stamp. He did. Have I got any time yet left? I got one more bell. One more bell? All right. I'll get used to that. I didn't really live by that in the back, so. But we have more time to come forward before people start coming in. I want to call your attention to chapter 2. That's what we're moving into. Chapter 2. Now, one more time. And you'll hear me say this over and over again, but I'm going to say it one more time today. There are no chapter divisions. There are no verse divisions in the original text. So, when you leave chapter 1, you're moving right on into chapter 2, which continues to follow the thought, but now he's going to break it down and be more specific in who he's talking to and the behavior that he is addressing. So, we're moving into chapter 2, he's going to be more specific in who he's talking to and the behavior. Because the Jews thought themselves to be superior, because they had God's law, to be superior to the Gentiles. But just having God's law does not make you right with God. Just having a Bible sitting on your coffee table or in your house or in your hand does not make you right with God. Just having a covenant relationship that was made with Abraham generations before did not mean that they were right with God. Do you see what I'm saying? Because relationship with God is me and God. Relationship with God is me and God. You and God. It's personal. So therefore you can't say, we have the law, God gave us the law, therefore we have a superiority over everyone else, and then turn around and do the things that law forbids to do. And then point to Gentiles and say, they don't have any law. God didn't give them a law, which by the way is not true. And we're going to see that as well. God didn't give them any law. He didn't give them anything to follow. So therefore, they have nothing to do with God. We do, they don't. Now, this was a real discussion that was going on in the church of the first century. Everywhere that you had a congregation that had Jews and Gentiles, this conversation was happening. They were having this conversation and discussing it. Didn't matter where you were. Some of the congregations you will notice does not touch on, or some of the letters do not touch on this because the congregation was primarily primarily a Gentile congregation, therefore it's not discussed. Other issues are discussed. Or you may be more years away from the establishment of the church, and so everyone's blending more. But anyway, okay, it's time for us to finish this morning. Okay. All right. We'll see y'all.